Before I signed the acquisition papers, my mother stood in a church basement in Savannah and told 3 dozen people I was homeless. On the table beside her sat my old graduation photograph, a white donation box, and a handwritten sign that said, "Help bring Evelyn home." I saw the picture on my phone while sitting in a glass conference room 42 floors above Singapore Harbor. Rain streaked down the windows like silver thread. Across the table, 2 attorneys waited with their pens ready. A senior investor adjusted his glasses and studied my face, trying to understand why I had gone so still. I was 29 years old. I was not sleeping under a bridge. I was not wandering bus stations with a paper cup in my hand. I was about to take control of a commercial debt portfolio worth more money than my father had ever seen in his life. I placed my phone face down on the table. "Before we sign," I said quietly, "I need to explain why my entire hometown believes I have no roof over my head." 14 months earlier, I was standing in the old kitchen of my grandmother Margaret's house on the edge of Savannah's Port District. The floors creaked under my shoes. The windows smelled faintly of salt, dust, and lemon polish. My grandmother had been gone for 6 weeks, but her presence still lived in that house, in the neat stack of property records she kept in a blue metal box, in the careful handwriting on every envelope, in the silence that felt more like guidance than emptiness. She had left the house to me. My parents hated that. Harold Carter, my father, had spent most of his life managing a local bank branch and speaking as if every room owed him respect. My mother, Patricia, wore pearls to breakfast and chaired every charity committee that would print her name on a program. They believed reputation was a second religion. They believed obedience was love. Then there was my older brother, Mason. 33 years old, handsome in the easy way that made people excuse unpaid bills and broken promises. He owned a small construction company with a polished logo, a leased truck, and a balance sheet that bled red ink. My grandmother saw through him. She saw through all of them. 2 days after her will was read, my parents invited me to dinner. Patricia served roast chicken on the wedding china, as if a pretty plate could soften a demand. Mason sat beside my father, scrolling through his phone. My father slid a folder across the table. It was a loan application. He wanted me to use grandmother Margaret's house as collateral for Mason's failing company. "It is family duty," he said. My mother reached across the table and touched my wrist. Her fingers were cold. "Your brother just needs one chance, Evelyn. You have always been the practical one." I looked at Mason. He did not meet my eyes. He did not thank me. He did not ask. He waited, as if my inheritance had always been parked in his driveway. Something inside me became very quiet. I pushed the folder back. "No," I said. My mother's hand withdrew as if I had burned her. My father's face hardened. Mason finally looked up, offended not by my words, but by the fact that I had spoken them. In the Carter family, a daughter saying no was not a boundary. It was a betrayal. By the next week, I had packed 2 suitcases and left Savannah without leaving an address. I did not run because I was weak. I left because I had learned from my grandmother that when people confuse love with ownership, distance becomes a lock on the door. My parents needed an explanation. They could not tell the church ladies, the neighbors, and the charity board that their daughter had walked away because they tried to mortgage her inheritance for their favorite son. So they built a sweeter lie. Evelyn lost her job. Evelyn fell apart. Evelyn is homeless somewhere and too ashamed to come home. At first, I thought it was only gossip. Then Simone, Mason's wife, sent me the photograph from the church basement. My mother stood beside a donation box, her eyes wet, her pearls glowing under fluorescent lights. My father had one hand over his heart. People were writing checks. I stared at the image, and the room around me seemed to narrow. They were not mourning me. They were using me. That same night, an alert flashed across my laptop. Someone had tried to access the property records for my grandmother's house. The login attempt came from Savannah. The security questions were answered correctly. my father knew my first pet's name. He knew the street I grew up on. He knew enough of my life to try stealing what was left of it. But he did not know everything. He did not know I had already transferred the house into a protected legal structure. He did not know I had formed harbor line assets. He did not know I was studying distressed commercial debt from a small apartment across the world. And he certainly did not know that the same daughter he called helpless was quietly preparing to buy the debt that held Mason's company by the throat. I closed the alert window and looked out at the dark harbor. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like the unwanted daughter. I felt like the storm they never saw coming. The first rule my grandmother taught me was simple: never defend a door with your body when you can build a wall around the whole house. I remembered that lesson in Singapore, sitting at a narrow desk beside a window that overlooked rows of shipping containers stacked like sleeping giants. The apartment was small, almost severe. One bed. One kettle. One chipped white mug. One folding chair that complained every time I sat down. But to me, it felt safer than my parents' beautiful house in Savannah ever had. Back home, my mother was telling people I had no place to sleep. In truth, I had never felt more sheltered. I spent my mornings studying commercial debt portfolios, my afternoons speaking with attorneys, and my nights building harbor line assets into something no one in my family could touch. I did not put my name where my father could easily find it. I used corporate filings, legal trustees, and registered agents. Every document became another brick. Every signature became another lock. Grandmother Margaret had prepared me for this without ever saying she was preparing me for war. When I was a girl, she used to sit with me on her back porch while the evening heat rolled in from the marshes. She would place old bills, house deeds, and bank notices on the table beside our glasses of iced tea. "Paper tells the truth people try to hide," she would say. At the time, I thought she was teaching me about money. Years later, I understood she was teaching me how to survive people who smiled while reaching for your throat. The first thing I protected was her house. A local attorney in Georgia filed the documents within a day. The property could not be refinanced, transferred, or borrowed against without direct legal review. If Harold tried to walk into a bank with an old family story and a forged signature, the system would not open for him. It would bite his hand. The second thing I protected was my name. I locked down every financial account, every email address, every digital record. I changed security answers to things my parents had never known. Not the name of my first pet. Not the street where I grew up. Not my mother's maiden name. My new answers belonged to no childhood they could exploit. While I built my wall, Simone watched from inside the Carter family. She was Mason's wife, 32, sharp-eyed, calm-voiced, and far too intelligent for the house she had married into. Simone was a contract lawyer in Atlanta. She dressed in dark suits, spoke in careful sentences, and had the kind of stillness that made dishonest people nervous. My mother never liked her. Patricia preferred women who laughed softly, agreed quickly, and made men feel larger than they were. Simone did none of those things. She listened. She noticed. She remembered. The first encrypted message she sent me was only one sentence. "They are collecting money in your name." Attached to it was a photograph of a church bulletin. My face had been printed beneath the words, "Emergency Family Assistance for Evelyn Carter." The paragraph below claimed I was missing, unstable, and without shelter. It asked for prayers, privacy, and financial help. My stomach turned cold. Then came the second attachment. A list of names. Aunt Louise had given $1,000. Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker from my mother's charity board had given $2,000. A retired deacon had given $500 from his fixed income. People who believed they were helping a lost woman were unknowingly keeping Mason's failing construction company alive. Simone's next message came 2 days later. "Your father deposited the checks. Mason paid a concrete supplier the same afternoon." I read that line 3 times. For a moment, I was back at my parents' dining table, staring at that loan application. I saw my father's steady hand. My mother's damp eyes. Mason's silent entitlement. They had not changed tactics. They had only changed the story. If I would not give them my inheritance willingly, they would turn my reputation into currency. I wanted to call them. I wanted to let my mother hear every sharp edge of my anger. I wanted to ask my father how a man could stand in a church basement and sell his daughter's humiliation by the envelope. But rage is expensive. It spends energy and buys nothing. So I called my attorney instead. By the end of the week, Harborline Assets had begun reviewing a distressed commercial debt package tied to several unfinished construction projects in coastal Georgia. One file made me stop breathing for half a second. Mason Carter Construction was listed as a dependent subcontractor on 3 troubled sites. Unpaid invoices. Delayed materials. Missed deadlines. Personal guarantees buried in careless language. Mason had built his company like he built his life, polished on the outside, rotten in the beams. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen. Outside, Singapore Harbor glowed under the night sky. Cranes moved slowly over the water, lifting containers with quiet, mechanical patience. My brother needed money to survive. My parents were stealing sympathy to feed him. And I was now studying the debt that could decide whether his company lived or died. Simone sent one final message before midnight. They are planning a larger fundraiser. I stared at those words until they settled into me like stone. Good, I typed back. Then let them gather everyone in one room. By the 3rd month in Singapore, my life had become a rhythm of silence, numbers, and locked doors. I woke before sunrise, while the city was still blue and quiet. I boiled water for coffee, opened my laptop, and entered the world my family had never believed I could understand. Debt schedules. Contractor liens. Delayed payments. Land use permits. Quiet failures hiding beneath polished company names. To most people, those files looked like dry paper. To me, they looked like footprints in wet cement. And Mason's footprints were everywhere. Mason Carter Construction had touched 3 unfinished projects along the Georgia coast. A boutique hotel near the riverfront. A luxury townhouse development outside Savannah. A medical office complex that was already 6 months behind schedule. On paper, Mason appeared to be a rising local contractor. In reality, his company was a porch with fresh paint and rotten columns. He owed suppliers. He owed subcontractors. He owed the bank. Worst of all, he had signed personal guarantees he clearly had not read. I almost laughed when I found them. Not because it was funny. Because it was exactly like him. Mason had always trusted charm to do the work of competence. He smiled at lenders, slapped men on the back, bought lunch, and believed the fine print would somehow bow its head and move aside. Fine print does not care who your parents favor. Harborline Assets began purchasing pieces of the distressed debt package through intermediaries. Quietly. Legally. Precisely. My name did not appear in public. To the outside world, Harborline was just a sharp new asset firm with foreign backing and a taste for troubled commercial properties. No one in Savannah knew the woman they were calling homeless was slowly becoming the creditor behind Mason's collapsing empire. While I built the structure, Simone built the evidence. Every Sunday, Patricia hosted what she called prayer gatherings. She placed framed photographs of me beside candles and soft white flowers. She told the women from church that I was ashamed, unreachable, and sleeping wherever strangers showed mercy. Her voice would tremble at the right moments. She knew exactly when to lower her eyes. My father played the solemn protector. He did not cry. He stood with his hand on the back of my mother's chair and accepted envelopes as if accepting a sacred burden. Simone watched from the corner. She sent me photographs of the donation cards. Bank deposit slips. Text messages from Patricia asking relatives not to mention the fundraiser online because my condition was fragile. 1. Message made my skin go cold. Evelyn refuses help because pride is part of her sickness. My mother had turned my dignity into a symptom. That night, I sat in the dark and let the anger pass through me slowly. I thought of older people in that church, people living on pensions, people who had known me since I wore Sunday shoes and carried a little white Bible. They were giving money because they believed my parents were trying to save me. They were not saving me. They were feeding Mason. Then the risk expanded. A Singapore investment group requested a founder review before committing capital to Harborline assets. Their analysts were impressed by my acquisition model, but they wanted to verify my background. Professional history. Legal standing. Reputation in my hometown. There it was. The lie had crossed the ocean before I ever boarded a plane. If an investigator walked into Savannah and asked about Evelyn Carter, he would not hear about disciplined filings, protected assets, or commercial intelligence. He would hear a tragic story about a daughter who had fallen apart. A woman with no home. No stability. No credibility. One rumor could poison the deal. For the first time in months, fear touched me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a cold finger pressed to the back of my neck. Then Simone sent another alert. A man in a gray suit came by Patricia's charity office asking questions about you. I read the message twice. Then I asked for a photograph. Within minutes, Simone sent one. The man stood beside a rental car, holding a notebook. I ran his name through public business records and found him quickly. He was not hired by my parents. He was a due diligence investigator working for the Singapore group. That changed everything. I did not hide from him. I invited him to a secure video call. When his face appeared on my screen, he looked cautious, professional, and already half convinced I was a liability. I gave him no emotion to doubt. I showed my passport. My incorporation records. My property filings. My acquisition timeline. Then I showed him the evidence Simone had gathered, the fake bulletins, the donation lists, the deposits into Harold's account, and the transfers that landed in Mason's company. His expression changed slowly. Pity left first. Then suspicion. Then came respect. I told him my family had created a false narrative to cover an attempted property grab. I explained that Harborline assets had been built behind legal protections because I understood the threat before anyone else did. I did not ask him to bury the truth. I asked him to report the full truth. A founder who can isolate a personal threat, secure inherited property, document fraud, and still execute a distressed asset strategy is not unstable. She is prepared. 3 days later, the capital commitment arrived. Harborline assets had funding. I stared at the signed term sheet in my inbox while the morning sun rose over Singapore Harbor. My hands were steady, but something deep in my chest loosened. Back in Savannah, my parents were planning their largest fundraiser yet. They believed they were gathering witnesses to my weakness. They did not know they were gathering witnesses to their own undoing. The final fundraiser was held in the Fellowship Hall of Grace Harbor Church, the same room where I had once eaten pound cake after Sunday service while older women pinched my cheeks and told me I had my grandmother's eyes. That evening, the room looked like a stage built for grief. White tablecloths covered the folding tables. Small glass candles flickered beside framed photographs of me from different ages. Evelyn at graduation. Evelyn at a Christmas pageant. Evelyn standing beside grandmother Margaret on the front porch of the old house. My mother had chosen the pictures carefully. Not one showed me strong. Not one showed me grown. She wanted them to remember a helpless girl. Patricia Carter stood near the front with a tissue folded in her hand. Her pearls rested against her throat like little white moons. My father stood beside her in a dark suit, his face solemn, his shoulders squared, every inch the exhausted father carrying a private burden. Mason hovered near the coffee table, restless and pale. His construction company was choking. Suppliers had stopped answering his calls. Workers had begun asking for wages he could not pay. The money in that room was not for me. It was oxygen for him. Simone stood near the back wall in a black dress, still as a shadow. Her phone was in her hand. Across the world, I sat alone in my Singapore office. The harbor lights shimmered through the glass behind me. On my laptop screen, a financial magazine had prepared the feature for release. The headline had already been approved. It named me as the founder of Harborline Assets. It confirmed the acquisition of a distressed commercial debt portfolio tied to coastal Georgia. It described the capital commitment, the legal structure, and the woman behind the firm. The woman Savannah believed was homeless. I watched the countdown clock. My mother began speaking first. She thanked everyone for loving our family through its darkest season. Her voice trembled with practiced softness. She said I was proud, wounded, and unreachable. She said some children wandered so far from home that only prayer could find them. Several older women lowered their heads. One man near the front wiped his eyes. My father stepped forward next. He spoke about duty. About sacrifice. About the terrible pain of watching a daughter refuse help. Then he gestured toward a white donation box near my photographs. "Anything you can give will help us keep trying," he said. People moved. Aunt Louise placed an envelope into the box. A retired teacher followed. Then a deacon. Then a couple from my mother's charity board. Their faces were heavy with pity. Simone did not move. In Singapore, the countdown reached 0. The article went live. At first, nothing happened. My screen refreshed. The link appeared. The photograph loaded, me in a navy suit, standing beside the windows of Harborline's office, Singapore Harbor behind me like a wall of steel and light. Then Simone's message arrived. "It is spreading." Inside the fellowship hall, the first phone buzzed. Then another. Then a dozen more. A low mechanical hum rippled through the room, cutting through the soft music and my mother's fragile speech. Aunt Louise looked down first. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the screen, then at my photograph on the donation table, then back at the screen. Her hand began to tremble. Someone whispered my name. Another person opened the article aloud. The words fell into the room like stones. Founder. Harborline Assets. Singapore. Acquisition. Coastal Georgia debt portfolio. My father's face changed before anyone accused him. The color drained from his cheeks. Mason grabbed his own phone, and I imagined the moment he saw the company name. Harborline Assets was not just in the article. It was now tied to the debt choking his projects. He finally understood. The sister he thought was sleeping on sidewalks had become the creditor standing over his business. My mother tried to recover. She laughed once, sharp and unnatural. "This is fake," she said. "It has to be fake. People can make anything on the internet now." No one answered her. Because the article linked to public filings. Investor statements. Acquisition records. Dates. Locations. Proof. Truth does not need to raise its voice when it brings documents. Then the doors opened. 2 process servers stepped into the fellowship hall carrying sealed envelopes. Their shoes struck the floor with clean, final sounds. The lead server walked straight to my father. "Harold Carter," he said. My father did not reach for the papers. The man pressed them into his hands anyway. The second server turned to Mason and handed him another envelope. Mason tore it open with clumsy fingers. His face collapsed as he read the notice. Harborline Assets had called the debt. His company had 30 days to cure defaults he could not possibly cure. Simone walked forward then. Calm. Beautiful. Untouchable. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table beside Mason's envelope. "I will not spend another day inside a family that sells lies and calls it love," she said. Then she walked out. No shouting followed her. No one stopped her. The room was too full of truth. In Singapore, I closed the article and looked out at the harbor. For years, my parents had used rooms full of people to make me small. That night, they gathered everyone themselves. And the truth arrived right on time. The silence after the fundraiser did not feel empty. It felt like a locked gate. For the first time in my life, Harold and Patricia Carter had no audience willing to believe them. The people who had once leaned forward with sympathy now stood back with narrowed eyes and folded arms. Aunt Louise demanded the return of every dollar she had given. The retired teacher wanted receipts. The deacon called the church board before sunrise. By Monday morning, the story had already moved through Savannah faster than summer thunder over the marsh. My parents tried to explain. Then they tried to deny. Then they tried to cry. None of it worked. Paper had replaced pity. The legal complaint laid out every step with cold precision. The false church bulletins. The donation lists. The deposits into my father's account. The transfers to Mason's construction company. The attempted access to grandmother Margaret's property records. Simone's evidence gave the story bones. My attorney gave it teeth. To avoid deeper prosecution, my parents began selling the life they had polished for public admiration. First went my mother's jewelry, then the second car, then the antique dining table where my father had once slid Mason's rescue loan toward me like a royal decree. Their large house near Forsyth Park went on the market within weeks. The lawn was still trimmed. The porch still looked respectable. But everyone in town knew the truth had already moved out before they did. Mason fell faster. Without the stolen sympathy money, his company could not breathe. Suppliers filed claims. Workers left. Equipment was repossessed from job sites in broad daylight. The logo he had bragged about for years was peeled from the office window by a man with a scraper and a ladder. It came off in strips, like old skin. He called me from an unfamiliar number one humid evening while I was reviewing Harborline's first quarterly report. I let it ring twice before answering. At first, he sounded smaller than I remembered. He said he was sorry. He said our parents had misled him. He said he had panicked. He said he only needed a temporary loan to get back on his feet. Then he used the same words my father had used. Family duty. For a moment, I saw him at that dinner table 14 months earlier, looking at his phone while they tried to mortgage my future. I saw him accepting money raised from my invented misery. I saw his silence sitting beside every lie like a loyal dog. I did not raise my voice. Mason, I said, you were not confused. You were comfortable. He tried to interrupt, but I continued. You saw enough to know something was wrong. You accepted the money anyway. That was not desperation. That was a choice. The line went quiet. I told him to find a bankruptcy attorney, take an honest job, and learn how to live without someone else paying the cost of his mistakes. Then I ended the call and blocked the number. There was no triumph in it. Only relief. A boundary is not cruel because someone dislikes where it stands. 2 months later, Simone arrived in Singapore with one suitcase and a divorce decree. She looked tired, but not broken. We sat in a quiet coffee shop near the harbor while rain tapped softly against the windows. I slid an employment contract across the table. Chief Legal Officer, I said. For the first time in months, she smiled. She read every page, of course. Then she signed. No tears. No speeches. Just a clean signature from a woman who had finally stepped out of a burning house and refused to look back. Harborline assets grew quickly after that. We bought distressed properties, repaired broken contracts, and turned failing portfolios into stable investments. One morning, an operations report crossed my desk from a construction management firm in Atlanta. Mason had taken a junior coordinator position there. The software system listed on the report belonged to Harborline. I sat very still when I saw it. Somewhere in a gray office cubicle, My brother was entering project data into a platform controlled by the sister he once thought existed only to rescue him. I did not need to humiliate him. Life had become the lesson. My parents sent one final message from a prepaid phone. We lost everything. We are still your parents. Please come home. I read it once. There was no apology. No accountability. Only loss dressed as love. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and placed the phone face down on my desk. That evening, I stood by the windows of Harborline's office. Singapore. Harbor glowed beneath the darkening sky. Cranes moved over the water with patient strength. Simone stood beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee and the latest report. Profits were up. Legal exposure was contained. Grandmother Margaret's house was safe. For the first time, I understood what peace really was. It was not being welcomed back into the family that broke you. It was building a life so steady that their voices could no longer reach the door. If Evelyn's story reminded you of someone who was underestimated, blamed, or forced to carry a family's lies, leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. And if you believe the strongest payback is sometimes building a life they can never control, like this video, subscribe to Waters Payback, and turn on notifications for the next story.